Ladies and gentlemen, you all know that we here at Authentic Sound, we do play music of the past quite slower than today generally is done. As for instance, the minuet of the First Symphony. Alberto and I played that piece like this. So very different compared to how this minuet is played today. The great thing about our approach is that we do not change a lot. We just look in a different way to those metronome marks. Instead of taking one click for each beat, we take 2 clicks for each beat.
4, 5, 6.
And suddenly all of the problems that these metronome marks pose, like to start with the insane speeds, they all are gone. Also, when we look back to all the sources, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15th century sources, the book we're going to publish is actually looking back so many centuries into history. All these sources that now books are filled to explain the difficulties, the problems, the inconsistencies of these sources just by taking a little bit of a different perspective, taking 2 ticks instead of 1. Everything is solved. Well, a lot of things are solved. And when you don't do that, when you stick to the modern view of historical metronome marks, well, then you'll have to explain a lot of issues, a lot of anomalies, so to say. And it seems sometimes to me that many musicians and also music lovers actually do like these speculative, imaginary solutions, creative solutions. And I also can understand why, because they kind of built a narrative of this untouchable status of many of the 19th century composers and performers that we today still like to see like a little bit like gods, untouchable. It's like Beethoven, Chopin, Schumann, Mendelssohn, all these composers, Franz Liszt, all these great performers that we wake up in the morning thinking like, how can we ever become Franz Liszt? I have witnessed that myself. I have been in conservatory practicing 5-6 hours a day. Why? Because you have these pictures, this in mind, like we will never be Chopin, we will never be Liszt. And of course, when you change this paradigm, when you take this a little bit of a different perspective, then suddenly these people become like humans. And in a way, we don't want that. And that's so understandable. But yet, we do want to know what Beethoven thought when he had the Fifth Symphony in his mind, right? What did he hear? How did he conduct that? How did he expect us to? And then, therefore, the metronome mark is super important. It's the only tangible element that we really can grasp. It's like a machine that gives the number of ticks, a frequency per minute. We can reproduce that with absolute certainty, because Beethoven's metronome wasn't broken. That is so important. Your tempo floor, the choice of tempo for any musician is super important, whether you want to reconstruct that original, this authentic idea or not. Andras Schiff will not play a Beethoven sonata different in Carnegie Hall than when he is in Concertgebouw in Amsterdam. He will just take the same tempo. Why? That's not because he's not creative, because he brought things together. He created a balance in performance where all the elements are laid one after the other. All these layers are built up on this floor, and the floor is determined by your tempo. You change the tempo, you change everything. You also change the character of the piece, and that's why so many composers in the 19th century were really, really stressing the fact that they wanted you to play their pieces in the tempo that they marked with the metronome, which is super problematic today, as I've explained many, many, many times, because many of these tempi are just too fast. And so we keep inventing new theories to explain the unexplainable, as for instance, Leonard Bernstein will do today in exactly the minuet of the First Symphony.
Well, here I am yet again studying Beethoven's First Symphony. How many times have I been through this score? I don't dare think. And yet it's always a joy and a refreshment to contemplate this first of 9 symphonies that changed the history of music. This is number 1, standing in the year 1 of the 19th century, like a glamorous invitation to enter a totally new era of Romanticism.
It's a wonderful fragment, just a few minutes long. I will break it into two parts. What you will hear first is Leonard Bernstein sitting at the piano, talking about the minuet movement of the First Symphony, and he's going to make the case for a revolutionary Beethoven, because the minuet traditionally is a slow tempo, and yet Beethoven marked this movement with dotted half note 108, so 1 bar equals 108, which is super fast. Let's listen to what Bernstein had to say about this.
Of course, this is not at all a romantic symphony. It still wears its Haydnish costume, quite 18th century, and yet it is different. For instance, you just caught me in the middle of studying the scherzo, the third movement, which, as you know, goes... But this movement is clearly marked menuetto. Now there's a mind-boggler, menuetto. We all know, of course, that the third movements of classical symphonies up to Beethoven's time were minuets. But here Beethoven has clearly made a revolutionary decision to speed up his minuet to something no longer even recognizable as a minuet. He has marked it allegro molto e vivace. No question that he wants it very fast indeed. And he's even given it a metronome mark of 108 to a full bar, which is something like... It's very fast.
So his point is, Beethoven marked this movement minuet. Minuet is not a very fast tempo. We have the scherzo for that. And so yet we have the metronome mark given by Beethoven, which just conflicts with this traditional meaning of a minuet. So Beethoven must have been a revolutionary guy because he changed what historically the minuet was as the first in history. But then he continues. In the next fragment, you will hear Bernstein reflecting on this idea and also playing this minuet as a true minuet. And then something remarkable happens. Let's listen.
But he still has that word menuetto staring at us in all its 18th century innocence. And that's the mind-boggler. Do you suppose he just might have first thought of this music as a minuet in a normal minuet tempo? Let's see what it might have sounded like, if so. Not bad, but not very eventful. And if he had gone on in that tempo, it could have become very boring indeed. And so with one swift revolutionary decision, Beethoven transformed the minuet into a scherzo. And a whole new century has opened up.
What is so remarkable is that how much closer can you come to this solution? Like Bernstein literally is demonstrating the minuet as a minuet, and then he just demonstrates what that tempo would look like or sounds like. I will give you that fragment again where Bernstein plays the minuet. Again, it's important. I want to stress this, where Bernstein plays this minuet in what he thinks is or should be a minuet tempo. And then I'll give you the recording Alberto and I made of the symphony in Czerny's four-hand transcription, and you'll be shocked.
Let's see what it might have sounded like, if so.
So how much closer can you come to this whole beat solution, to this insight? Bernstein's tempo is quite exactly Beethoven's metronome mark read in whole beat. But yet, it seems like I have this weird picture, like the whole beat solution is here. There is just a very easy door to open, and Bernstein is here, but he takes the door handle, and instead of opening it, he goes back. And he goes back to a certain solution that is based on nothing. We don't have in the 19th century sources or people actually confirming what Bernstein is trying to explain. There was no sign of certain revolutionary aspect in Beethoven's Minuetto. Yeah, he used the scherzo, as Haydn already did, and the scherzo is a faster version of the minuet. The minuet has a quite complex history. You have early 18th century minuet, you had late 18th century minuets, where people were more inclined to dance, like in a different way. The 3/4 beat minuet, that's the version we talk about here. And then the other minuet, the faster minuet, that became the scherzo de waltz, where you have more like one strong beat per bar. So the faster version. But in the 19th century, there is no such explanation necessary for Beethoven's minuet, that he made a mistake. For instance, let's just take Hugo Riemann's Musiklexikon. I have here an original edition, and I'm just reading from what he had to say also about the minuet in regard of Beethovens music. Minuet, ältere französische Tanzform, die indes der Kunstmusik nicht über Lully zurückreicht. Das Minuet bewegt sich im Trippeltakt, ursprünglich in sehr mäßigem Tempo mit verbindlichem Anstand und ist ohne Versierung vorzutragen. Ein Musterstück des älteren Minuets ist das bekannte in Don Juan und so weiter und so weiter und so weiter. And then he talks about Mozart and Beethoven. Beethoven steigerte das Haydn's Minuett weiter zum Scherzo und versteht unter Tempo di Minuetto wieder eine etwas gemäßigtere Bewegung. So if I translate, Beethoven increased the tempo of the Haydn Minuet to a scherzo, and he understands, when he writes Tempo di Minuetto, again, a somewhat moderate tempo. So in other words, when Beethoven marks minuetto, he really wants you to play it in a minuetto tempo, like Bernstein demonstrated, in his opinion, too slow. It sounded nicely, and then he said further on, he went on to say like, okay, but it's a little bit heavy, and if you go back and play that fragment again, you will see that he actually slows down the tempo again, and of course then you get something very static, and like that you can kill any performance, any tempo. The way he played the beginning was quite okay. So, but that's a side note, that's not so important. The issue is, like, when you go to the 19th century, you actually see references like Hugo Riemann. He was not just someone, he was one of the most respected, so to say, theoretical writers, authors. He wrote like books like this. It's actually unbelievable how these people find the time to do all of that. There must have been a knowledge in these people's mind. Anyways, 19th century, minuet, Beethoven, it's a slow movement. 20th century, Bernstein, yeah, it's a slow movement, but it doesn't correlate, it doesn't correspond with the metronome mark. So what do? The solution is not to slow it down, not to read the metronome mark in whole beat, but to invent some kind of theory. Beethoven must have been a revolutionary guy, so he changed everything. Then I say to you, that's probably the reason why he marked this movement with minuet. And he left it like that. And none of his entourage, no one, not Czerny, not Marshall, not all these people that really were occupied with Beethoven's music so much, Hans van Bülow later, all the editions, the Breitkopf editions, the official editions later in the 19th century, none of these people or editions or whatever thought like, actually it's a scherzo, let's just change that. Not even making a footnote like, hey guys, keep in mind, Beethoven marked it scherzo, but we know he was a revolutionary guy. So, yeah, 1801, First Symphony, 1800, yeah, he didn't know about the scherzo. He just had a minuet, but he revolutionized that. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. If that really was the case, there should be something traceable back to Beethoven's days where you can see the context around that. But it's very interesting because if you then go into 20th century, you might think like Bernstein is the only one who had this problem. But it's not true. I happen to have this book, and probably there are many more books like this than the one I have here. But this is just like was a very known book, The Nine Symphonies of Beethoven by Wouter Paap. It's a Dutch publication, and he talks about the minuetto in exactly the same way. He says, minuetto, het wonderlijke van dit minuet is dat het eigenlijk in het minst geen minuet genoemd kan worden. So he says that the surprising thing of this minuet is that it cannot be called a minuet because of the tempo, he says. De tempo-aanduiding allegro molto vivace geeft dit reeds te kennen. The tempo indication allegro molto vivace is enough to actually make it understand that it cannot be a minuet. And so, again, the 20th century adds layers of confusion on something, as I was saying in the beginning, something that just disappears when you just step a little bit aside. You have this little paradigm shift. The paradigm shift is not that we change a lot. The paradigm shift is that you just take a different look, you take a different perspective, and we're not discovering something, we're not inventing something, we just look at the known things in a little bit of a different way, and suddenly all the problems disappear.
Do you suppose he just might have first thought of this music as a minuet in a normal minuet tempo?
So to remember from this story is like, you have a great guy, Bernstein. He's not an idiot at all. It's not what I'm saying. I'm not featuring Bernstein to downplay him, to say like, see, the guy couldn't think for himself. It's absolutely normal. I do understand. You are in it's a rabbit hole. You are in a certain direction, and it's so hard to stop and to just turn your head around, like not even much. You just need a little bit, a slightly different perspective, and everything is solved. And he didn't see the obvious, but the obvious is only obvious to us because we are there. And so the reason why I bring this story with Bernstein is that we're not the only one with solutions. In fact, Bernstein gave the solution. It's there. He literally says the minuet sounds like this. Yeah, but you play the minuet with Beethoven, which Beethoven marks as a minuet in whole beat. It's the correct tempo because it's the correct interpretation of that metronome mark. So, and finally, what happens then is that we stop thinking Beethoven made all of these mistakes. It's great to hear Bernstein say like Beethoven was a revolutionary guy, but yeah, bottom line is that he made a mistake. He marked his movement with the wrong description. As in many instances, how many times do you read something about Beethoven's metronome mark in a way that you could say, like, for instance, a few years back, these Spanish authors, like, you have to look underneath the weight, and there, that's what Beethoven had in mind. It's, by the way, that article was already written in the 70s. It's surprisingly that nobody saw that. But anyways, you cannot read the metronome like that. That's like basically impossible. And then you have to assume that Beethoven didn't know how to use a metronome, so he made mistake after mistake after mistake. And not only that, you have to assume that all his entourage, like all his friends, great musicians, Beethoven was not like living on an island. Everybody came to Beethoven, everybody played his music. That all of these people, like Karl Czerny, Moscheles, and all the rest, actually said to each other, like, let's keep it quiet, because we know the guy misuses his metronome, and in some cases, some people say abuses metronome, but we don't say it because he would get angry. And not only that, they would decide, all of them, like, oh, you know what? Let's also misuse our metronome like Beethoven, because he might discover that when we use it in a different way, he might ask questions. So let's also do that. And not only that, also the generations after that, because the entire 19th century's metronome marks are almost like they are in the same range. So all of these generations in the entire 19th century must have then said, like, listen, we are going to keep this secret. Well, that's a conspiracy theory. People sometimes accuse our work here like, yeah, but it's like, what you're saying is basically like everybody's wrong, and all the universities and all the academics and the scholars, like they're wrong and you're right. That's a conspiracy theory. They're hiding something. No, that's not what I'm saying. They're not hiding something. But this, if Beethoven's metronome if Beethoven would have misused or not used his metronome in the right way, well, then you would have a conspiracy theory of those generations of the 19th century keep this like as a secret. But they didn't. Of course, Beethoven didn't make a mistake. Also, Beethoven didn't mark this movement wrong. Beethoven knew what a minuet was, and when he marked minuet, he indeed meant what Bernstein demonstrated. That's the tempo. It's a strong indication. That's also, by the way, the reason why we will call the book Fixing the Beethoven Mistake. Not that Beethoven made a mistake, but we assume he did. And so we are fixing the idea of him making a mistake. A paradigm shift in classical music. That's what the book will be called. Okay, guys, that was it for today. I have another video on Bernstein. Some of you will know. If you watch this video much later in the future, we won't. I will link it here and on screen. And also, don't forget, we have a Patreon page. My Patreons are the backbone of this project. Without them, I wouldn't be talking to you. It's a Tuesday afternoon. They grant me the possibility. They give me also the permission by their financial contribution. I have to say it like, Wim, you can take that Tuesday afternoon to make this video. Tomorrow morning, I have a meeting with Arthur, who is translating the parts of Lawrence and also copy editing them. In the afternoon, we have a meeting with Julien in France about the database that we're working on, which is in a pretty advanced stage. And my patrons actually give me the permission to be there and to guide this project and to just do all the things that we are doing. So check it out. And also there you find podcasts that I record where I go much more in depth on these topics that, I display here on YouTube. So thank you for checking it out. I hope it's something for you, and to see you over there at the other side in our Patreon room. For now, thanks for watching. We see each other very soon again. Bye.